Hello, my name is Kenneth Paul, and this is my woodworking shop. It's a genuine pleasure to have you here today. I make these videos to share with you the woodworking projects and techniques from here in my shop. Today's video is chapter 9 on making an heirloom wooden tool chest. We're going to be putting the finish on today. We're going to be using a 1-pound cut shellac. We're going to be using a gel varnish, Renaissance wax. We're going to be rubbing it out. We're going to be I'll go through which sandpaper grits I'm using and why. I'll go on why you should never use compressed air. When you're sanding this off, vacuum it with a natural bristle brush. If you use compressed air, you're doing two things. You're putting a ton of dust in the air, and you're blowing the grit and dust into the wood fibers that you don't want. So we'll go over all of that during the video. All right, I'll show you step by step what I use, the technique I prefer for putting a finish on. I don't have a dust-free environment. I don't have a separate finishing room. So the techniques I use to put a finish on have to be able to something that can be used in a less than dust-free environment. And you can use them too. All right, let's get right to it. And as always, if you enjoy the content or if you just want to support me, like, subscribe, or comment. All right, let me show you how I got this finish on. All right, we're at the point now that before I go any further with the construction of this tool chest, now that it's all sanded, I want to get a sealer on this. I want to protect the wood. So I've already finished sanding. I've sanded this up to 400 grit. Ordinarily, I don't go past 220. When you go past 220, what you start doing is burnishing the wood fibers to where it won't absorb a finish. But that's exactly the reason I'm going past 220 on this. Cherry is notorious for being a blotchy wood to stain or put a natural finish on. And there's a lot of reasons why the wood gets blotchy. There's a lot of theories out there. Some people say it's because there's more resin in some areas of the wood. Some people say it's the wild grain going in different directions, creating a more porous area, a lesser density. It's unimportant. The blotchiness is caused by the finish absorbing unevenly into the surface of the wood. In order to combat that, what I'm doing is sanding up to a 400 grit, which helps to burnish the wood a little bit and stop the finish from going in quite so quick. Then what we're going to do is, moving over here, we're going to put two sealer coats of a thin shellac. Those two wash coats are going to help seal the surface before I move on to my General Finishes gel wipe-on varnish. If I was doing a brush-on regular varnish on this, I wouldn't have sanded that far because, again, once the wood fibers are burnished to that degree, they don't absorb a finish well. But the finishes I'm using are either water thin or wipe on. Now this is your standard shellac that you'll see in most of your hardware stores. This is a 3-pound cut. That means 3 pounds of shellac flakes to 1 gallon of alcohol. However, this is not de-waxed, which means you could have trouble on subsequent coats for other finishes. You could get little fish eyes and such. Now this is a sanding sealer. This is a 2-pound cut, 2 pounds of shellac flakes to 1 gallon of alcohol. This is de-waxed. This is what you want to be using, but we're going to thin it even more. What we have here is I've taken this 2-pound cut and I've cut it 50-50 with denatured alcohol to create a 1-pound cut, which is almost water thin. We're going to put 2 coats of this water thin shellac on, and that's going to seal our wood fibers and help prevent some of that blotchiness. All right, let me set up the camera and I'll show you me applying it. All right, now the brush I'm using to apply this varnish, this shellac, is a natural bristle brush. This one is sheep's hair. This one is a Japanese brush called a hake brush, H-A-K-E. I find it's a little better quality than the standard chip brushes, and this is what I like to use for applying shellac. Again, this is a water-thin consistency. This soaks right into the wood. It will help seal those wood fibers, especially on this slightly curly grain, to give us the best possible chance to limit the blotchiness. One of my favorite parts of woodworking is this point right here where we're seeing the true color of the wood for the first time. See how that the inlaid banding, that paraffin we put in, see how the color pops on that? This goes on quick, and this will dry in 5 minutes. You can move on to sanding right away. That's one of the nice things about shellac. Again, I like to see, for a little bit of protection, I like to see oil as my top coat, which is why we're going to be using General Finishes gel varnish as our final coat. But our first two sealer coats, our wash coats, are going to be this thinned 1 pound cut shellac. And again, de-waxed shellac. Okay. All right, let me show you me putting a coat of shellac on one of the curved tops, and we'll move on from here. All right, I've got these set up over here. Let's get some shellac on these. Again, put it on quickly. The stuff dries really fast. And again, we're going to be sanding this. In fact, when this dries, we're going to be sanding this with 600 grit. And then we're going to do this all over again. Then I'm going to sand it with 800 grit. Then we're going to put the first coat of wiping varnish on, the gel varnish. And we'll sand that with 800 grit. Then we'll put the last coat, well, it depends how many coats. It's going to take at least 2 coats of the wipe-on varnish. I'll see what it looks like. Again, I'm not trying to build up too much of a film finish on this. I want to be able to feel the wood. I just want to protect it without looking plasticky. And again, I've always liked the way the finish brings out the color of the wood. Good, nice job on this sunburst wedged fan we have on the ends here. All right, I'm going to continue with this. I'll give you a peek once we're ready to sand the first coat. All right, where we stand now is I have 2 coats of 1 pound cut shellac sealer. What I did was, after I put on the first coat, I let it dry, which on shellac is very quick, and then I sanded it with 600 grit sandpaper. Now, 600 grit, when you're using a fine grit sandpaper, you don't want to use your hand. You want to put either a sponge, a soft block, or a foam pad. The dust can build up in between. And speaking of dust, when you're sanding, you want a white dust to be forming underneath the sandpaper. If it's starting to clog up the sandpaper, I mean, on this kind of fine sandpaper, you're going to get an occasional little something stuck to the paper. That's okay. But if the back of the paper is gumming up instead of forming a white dust, your finish isn't dry enough yet. Let it sit longer. Now, I vacuum while I'm sanding. Now, a word on vacuuming while you're doing this kind of fine sanding. This is the standard vacuum brush, nylon brush. If you're using this on something when you're going past 220 grit sandpaper, this is going to leave scratches. get yourself a natural hair bristle brush for your vacuum. This kind of a natural bristle brush will not leave marks in your finish, because that nylon brush is actually capable of leaving scratches in your 600 grit finish. So highly recommend you get a natural hair bristle attachment for your vacuum cleaner. Now that we're fully sealed and it's dried and I've sanded and tack clothed, at this point we're ready to start putting on our top coat finish. I'll be using General Finishes Satin Gel Top Coat. It's a gel urethane oil base. I'll show you when I start using it. This you can either brush on or rag it on. It goes on very thin. I like using this because you can rag it off to almost dry. This is not a dust-free environment by any means. So this kind of finish works well for people that don't have a dedicated finishing space like me. Here are the two halves of the top, also with 2 coats of sealer on them. Now this coat, after the second coat, it wasn't saying it was 600. After the second coat, I sanded this down to 800, and I'll use 800 for each subsequent coat now. Again, this is even though there's only 2 coats of sealer, there's a very slick surface right now because we brought it all the way to 800 grit. I'll put on a coat of oil, I'll let the oil dry, I'll sand that back with an 800 grit, and we'll take it from there. Alright, let me get going. I'll show you me starting to apply the oil, and we'll keep going with the finish. Alright, let me get to it. Alright, this is the consistency of the gel varnish. You can see just how thick it is. This is already fully stirred up. It's a very thick consistency. Now I'll be applying this with a hake brush again, and then wiping it off with a rag. Oh, evening it out with a rag. One more thing on the hake brushes. See this hake brush? Solid as a rock. This is the one I use for my shellac. I don't bother cleaning the brushes I use for shellac. I let them dry this way. Shellac never fully cures. I'll put this brush away with the shellac can. Now when I go to shellac again, I just got to put this in a little bit of denatured alcohol, and this will come right back and I'll be able to continue using it. So you don't have to just wipe them semi-dry. Let them harden. It's okay. When you put this back on alcohol, this brush will be fine. The brushes for oil-based urethane, on the other hand, that does cure, and if you're going to reuse them, you do have to clean those. Alright, let me set up. Alright, here we are applying this. You want this applied in a thin coat. You can apply this with a rag, or you can apply this with a sponge brush, a chip brush. You can apply this with almost anything. Main thing is to spread out a thin coat quickly. We'll be putting in 2 to 3 coats of this. If I didn't have 2 coats of shellac already, I'd probably put 4 to 5 coats of this kind of thin wipe-on gel urethane. And again, this is the satin. I'm not looking for a glossy finish. Alright, we've got a coat on there. I'm going to dip a little of this rag, a little bit in the can, get a little on this rag. Here we go. Now I'm going to even it off with this lint-free 100% cotton rag. Look at it in a raking light. Make sure you have no dry spots. Catch the dry edge of the rag, go around your edges. All right. Well, you get the idea. I'm going to continue moving along. I'll show you after everything is finished. And again, we'll let this coat dry. When this is totally dry, it's a little cold in here, so it might not dry in a full 24 hours. I might have to wait 48 hours. We will see. Again, when I go to sand, if it's making a white powder with my sandpaper, it's cured and ready. If it's gumming the paper, it needs to dry more. All right, let me get to it. All right, the finish is done. Take a quick peek at it. I'm happy with how it turned out. I've got all my drawer knobs in, which are made out of Indian head nickels. There, let me show you a close-up on them. And then the Indian head, and then another buffalo. All right. Here we go. Let's close the drawers on this side. Now the benefit of the magnetic lock system, it makes the drawers self-closing when they get close. Let's open it up inside. Let's see. And you can see the knob I put on top of the steel post for the lock mechanism. When the line is horizontal, they're unlocked. When it's vertical, they're locked. It's just a piece of cherry with a piece of rosewood inset into it. And unlocked. Really happy with the fit and finish. Of course, we're only a little past halfway on this project. There's a ton of work to do. Next, we're going to work on, this will be chapter 9 now. On chapter 10, we'll be doing the through dovetail cantilevered shelves, which will also have inlay work on them. That'll be the next project. And after that, I've got hinged saw sheaths that'll go inside, and then the nearly 100 tools that go in this, every one of them will be fit into the case. So we have some work to do yet, but it's starting to look like a tool chest. Now, on the finish, let's go over what I did again. We put 2 seal coats of bullseye seal coat. Now remember, this is a 2-pound cut. I cut that 50-50 to make a 1-pound cut. Applied 2 coats. Then once those coats were sanded to 600 on the first coat, I sanded to 800 on the second coat. Then a coat of the General Finishes oil-based gel top coat in satin. Ordinarily I would put several coats of this, but I put 1 coat on, and because of the shellac sealing underneath, I got to tell you, the gel top coat really stayed on the surface, so I only put the 1 coat. And then I rubbed it out with Renaissance wax with a white Scotch-Brite pad, a 3M pad. And then for lubing the sides of the drawers, I use Slip It. It's a sliding compound specifically meant for wooden doors, windows, anything you need to slide that's made out of wood. Slip It really helps things move nicely. Okay. Well, the finish is done, so at least now it'll be stable because winter's coming here, so it's starting to turn cold. I'm starting to use the wood burner in here, so I wanted to get that wood sealed up while it was still fresh. Alright, well, as always, if you enjoy the content, do me a favor, like, subscribe, comment. And as I said, particularly comment. For some reason, YouTube likes comments. And as I said before, the finish really brought out the colors in that purfling we use for banding. And the finish also really brought out that nice effect of the box joints curving all the way around. And the finish did a nice job of bringing out the carving on the handles. And I also really like that little bit of an ellipse there with the rosewood backing on it. All right. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.